It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Following the disastrous defeat in attempting to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, the Trump administration has turned its attention to tax reform. Conservatives and business-allied advocacy groups such as the American Action Network and the Business Roundtable plan to spend millions of dollars this month alone in order to push for business-friendly changes to the tax code. This comes just as the Democratic senators signed an open letter to Donald Trump and the Republican leadership calling for a bipartisan approach to tax reform. Joining us today to discuss the Republican and Democratic plans for the tax code and the overall federal budget is Bill Black. Bill is a white-collar criminologist, associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's the author of The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. Bill, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Bill, the Democrats have plan on tax reform, and their plan actually stated three objectives. One, that it should not increase taxes for the middle class or cut taxes for the top 1% of the owners, which sounds good. It should, they said, should also follow regular order on the Senate floor. And three, it should not add to the budget deficit. How do you respond to these demands?
Well, first, of course, it's not a plan. It's preconditions for any bipartisan effort that might become a plan. And it's interesting that, of course, that this is one where the Democrats sensibly could have an actual plan and present it, and it's a failure, a real lost opportunity to avoid doing so. Now, the second thing is two of the provisions in the demands make perfect sense, but the third makes no sense at all, and that is that there be nothing that would ever, as part of a fiscal plan, increase the deficit. And that's going to turn right around and bite Democrats very badly, and more to the point, bite the nation very hard in future years, as it has done in the past. The federal deficit is not the same thing remotely as if you or I run a deficit or have a debt. It is not the same thing as if a state government or a municipality. The United States of America is a sovereign government with a sovereign currency. These things about deficits and debt ceilings come out of a different era when there was a gold standard that, by the way, produced innumerable recessions and was a horrible standard. And we have evolved beyond it 50 plus years ago, basically. But we still have these old rules as if we were under a gold standard. And we don't, and they really get in the way, in particular, of social programs, which the Democrats say that they favor, and the safety net, which they say that they favor. So this is bad economics and bad politics on the part of the Democrats.
Now, Bill, here's a clip from the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin, explaining part of the government's tax agenda. I understand that let's take a listen to it first. Here we go.
And we will pass tax reform.
Hear, hear.
And this is about creating jobs. This is about creating wage growth. This is about a simpler and fairer tax system. We're going to simplify personal taxes, where 95% of Americans will be able to fill out their tax return on a large postcard.
Now, I imagine you might have some concerns about that, particularly the financial literacy of those pushing certain tax proposals. Can you explain?
Well, there are a large number of issues anytime you change taxes. And what the most abused word in Washington, D.C. is the word reform. because they apply it to changes, for example, in health insurance, that harm people. And that would seem to be the opposite of a reform. Here, the first premise that the Treasury has is that taxes explain why United States growth is low and it's fallen. And that is simply, there's no economic basis for that claim at all. The United States does not have the highest corporate taxes, and in practice, the corporate tax rate is much lower. But there are problems with the corporate income tax. It's extremely hard to collect that tax because it is so easy to evade, and because corporations, large corporations, and small governments find it in each other's interest to create tax havens and do special deals to massively reduce taxation. And of course, if you're Luxembourg or Cayman Islands and such, even if you just get a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage tax and claim falsely that the income of a major corporation was largely earned in your country, you'll get an incredible windfall in terms of tax revenues. But of course, much, much larger taxes will be lost to the nations where those corporations are really based, like the United States and such. So this is a pernicious standard, and it creates a Gresham's dynamic. And again, a Gresham's dynamic is what happens when bad ethics drives good ethics out of the marketplace. Well, if I'm an honest corporation and I'm trying to compete with folks who have this special tax deal that allows them to escape most of their corporate income tax liability, I'm at an enormous competitive disadvantage and may well be driven out of business unless I'm willing to play the same sad and abusive game. So, lots of economists would be happy to see moving away from the corporate income tax to other forms of taxation,
Right.
but they probably won't do that.
All right, Bill. So draw on some examples out there that we can learn from.
So, if the corporate income tax was paid by every corporation in the same amount, economists don't actually know who, as a practical matter, ends up bearing that tax, but most economists think it would probably act like a sales tax. And of course, that would mean it would get passed on to the consumers. And a sales tax tends to be a pretty regressive tax. In other words, poor people pay a higher percentage of their income, sometimes a much higher percentage of income. So, what tends to work instead is progressive income, personal income taxes, and then some forms of wealth taxes. Of course, the leading form of wealth tax we have in the United States is the property tax and such. So there really isn't a crisis in public finance at the national level. At the state and local level, there often is, although those crises are again created by these perverse competition between the states. You just saw an example of this with this massive giveaway of public funds by the state of Wisconsin to bring a Taiwanese company in, which supposedly is going to create 10,000 jobs, but a large number of them will be robots and such. And the 3 billion giveaway of taxes will exceed any benefits from this company coming in. So you could stop those kinds of perverse competitions. You could ban them. You could provide more federal taxation to raise the money and then have it distributed to the states and localities. There are lots of things we could do if people really wanted to fix things. Basically, you can do whatever Kansas did, you do put a negative sign in front of, and you do the opposite. You'll make places much better off. But neither the Republicans nor the Democrats, as I said, there is no real Democratic plan, are offering these better alternatives.
Right. So, Bill, what are the main difficulties this government faces when it comes to both the federal budget and the debt ceiling, and of course, the tax reform that goes along with all of that?
So the debt ceiling is a classic example of something that doesn't make any sense. It's a product of a bygone era when you owed debts in gold, and if you didn't have gold, it would be a really big problem. But we have a sovereign currency. Not only can we borrow money in our own currency at any time, and pretty much without limit. But on top of that, that's not how you actually make money most of the time. You make money at the Federal Reserve by literally by making keystrokes on a computer. So all the debt limit does is a provided device for extortion by whichever group is willing to be the most extreme. And for the last 15 years, this has been the Freedom Caucus, which is one of the worst, most inaccurate names in history, and its predecessor ideological groups, particularly in the House of Representatives. And they basically hold the debt ceiling hostage and say, we're going to bring down the whole financial system by gratuitously causing the federal government to default on its debt unless you give us the following things. What they in particular want to do now, particularly given their failure to gut health care, because that bill that was going to gut health care was also going to defund Planned Parenthood. So it is expected that Freedom Caucus members are going to say that they will try to prevent passage of an increase in the debt ceiling unless there's a rider to the bill that would defund Planned Parenthood. So you want to get rid entirely of this device of extortion. We should get rid of the debt ceilings and simply use normal budgetary processes to figure out what you want to spend and what you want to tax.
And does this situation offer us any opportunities one could seize?
Well, the left can do the same thing, of course. It can say that we will not provide votes to raise the debt limit unless you give us X. But again, for the same type of reason that we shouldn't lie, we shouldn't create this false narrative that the federal deficit is just like a household going into debt, and we shouldn't, emulate these highly destructive tactics used by the Koch brothers through their creatures, the Freedom Caucus, and have the left compete for irresponsibly threatening the financial health of not only the nation. If you actually cause the default in U.S. debt, which these morons could actually do by refusing to raise the debt limits, then you would cause not only an economic crisis in the United States, but globally.
Bill, when Donald Trump and Mike Pence were running for office last September, they released their economic vision, promising a growth tax plan that would create 25 million new jobs in the next decade. Now, the link to that fact sheet and the plan now leads to an error message. But how would you compare the current proposals to the economic vision they outlined during the election campaign?
Well, their vision is, the type of thing that comes from ingesting too much peyote. It doesn't make any economic sense. They've been claiming similar variants of this for 50 years, that if only we were to dramatically reduce the marginal income tax for the wealthy, we would suddenly get this incredible burst of growth. Well, we substantially reduced the highest marginal tax rate. It's down dramatically from what it was under Eisenhower, for example, and growth has slowed instead of increased. Uh, the premise that people don't work because there's an income tax, or that corporations don't work because there's a corporate income tax, is simply false at all kinds of levels, all the kinds of levels of taxation that we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, certainly you could impose 100% tax, and people would in fact cut down their working very substantially at that point, but no one in the United States wants to do that.
All right, Bill, I'm a great advocate of the best way to understand economics is to listen to Bill Black. I thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on the Real News Network.